we doing? Hot dog. You guys are alive and well. I can't say it because it's going to be recorded, but you're my favorite service. The 11 o'clockers, man, I bust on their chops all the time because it's like, you guys are alive, awake, you've had coffee, it's awesome. They have been awake for hours, and I think they're ready for a nap. I'm not really sure. But super glad you're here this morning. If you're a first-time guest, welcome. We are wrapping up our Sermon on the Mount series this morning. It is a week till Christmas. You guys ready for that? Yeah, some of you, your heart just stopped. You're like, crud, I've not done my shopping, okay? Amazon can still get it to you, I promise. How many of you have it done and wrapped? I don't like you. I like that you're a part of this service, but I don't like it. It's amazing to me that you people are so ahead of the ball game. Well, hey, before we jump in this morning, got a couple of things that I do want to announce. A couple of weeks ago, we had talked about the fact that 4 Mile Run Christian Church and us are doing a merger. They voted on that last week, and we are definitely doing that. So that is great news. Yeah, you can clap for that. Absolutely. So our leadership team, their leadership team, we're trying to work out all the details, get everything done. On December 31st will be their first week. They will be meeting primarily, we told them, all campuses, obviously one church, multiple locations, but most of them will be meeting over at our 150 Victoria Road. A couple of people have asked about buildings and all that kind of stuff. Hey, what are we doing? At this point, we're not for sure. We're working through with our leadership teams, trying to figure out what are the best options because we're growing very quickly, all in one Sunday, boom. So we've got some decisions to make, and we'll be keeping everybody up to date on that as we move into the new year. But right now, we will be continuing worshiping in our 150 Victoria Road campus, and that for the foreseeable future, for sure. So wanted to let you know that. Also, last week, we had these on the seats. I want to make one more mention. If you are intending on making Boardman your home campus, okay, we would love for you to stop by the information desk out front, and please fill out one of these. The reason being is we need to have an idea. It's not that we want to sell your information. As I've said many times, though, if the price is right, I will. The reality is we need to know how many are leaving, and we need to know how many. Sheldon is trying to figure out how many people are actually going to be attending, so we can just have a good idea of what's going to be launching and how all that's going to work. So again, if you would fill that out, if you're planning. If you're not, forget what I said, and we'll move on, all right? So this morning, we are, again, wrapping up our Sermon on the Mount series. We're looking at Matthew's chapter 5, 6, and 7. It's arguably one of the best, if not the best sermon that Jesus ever preached, and it's a message primarily on countercultural living. And countercultural living, what I mean by that is Jesus lived in a culture, just like we live in a culture, that oftentimes we're far from God. And Jesus is preaching and teaching about the things that are of God's kingdom. So again, it's not a list of virtues to abide by. It's not, hey, if I get all this right, then I get into heaven. It's not, hey, if I follow this list, then I'm justified and I'm saved. That's not what the message is about. But truthfully, it's all about what it looks like to live as kingdom people. And what I mean by that is followers of Jesus in a world that is oftentimes far from him. And because the truth is, the world is broken. When Adam and Eve sinned, the world had delivered to it sin, rebellion, brokenness, pride, and Jesus is trying to unwind all of that. And here we are, a couple thousand years later, still doing the same thing. And thankfully, because of God's grace, God makes the promise that he is going to restore his kingdom back to the way that he originally intended, okay? So again, going back to Matthew chapter 5 through 7, this message is not about getting everything right. It's not about you making sure, okay, I got this checked off, this checked off, this checked off, so God's good with me, okay? It's much deeper than that. And today, as we dig in, we're going to wrap up. We're going to talk about making wise decisions. Now, immediately when you hear that, you're like, oh, that's pretty easy. For most of us, we try to make good decisions. I'm going to warn you. This is probably some of the hardest teaching that Jesus gives, because he's basically telling us what the ramifications of not doing what he's teaching, what those ramifications will be. So there's some significant seriousness to this that I don't want you to miss, okay? So we're gonna get into this, and again, making wise choices seems pretty simple when you think about it, all right? But here's what I believe. I believe your decisions determine your destiny. Does everybody agree with that? Raise your hand if you do. right? Your decisions determine your destiny. What you do now has significant consequences or impact on what you're doing later. So that then leads to this. Am I going to make wise or foolish decisions? Now, I already know what you're thinking. I'm going to make wise decisions because that's what we all say. We all say it, yet we live in a world full of people, including us, that we make foolish decisions constantly, right? It's much quicker and easier for us to point that out in other people. Just get on social media, turn on the news. You'll find out very quickly how dumb people really are, right? Okay, you agree. The truth is, you didn't want to agree. You're like, that's funny, he's right. It's true. We are, all of us. And that's the thing we have to remember, and that's what Jesus is really getting at, okay? We're all foolish. As my dad so eloquently said, you're all one decision away from stupid. And he's right. I would leave out, and I would go out with my buddies, or I'd go out on a date, and he'd say, Sean, you're one decision away from stupid. Remember that. And he's right, because we're all fallen and broken. So let me give you a quick faith example about what I'm talking about here. Will you be a follower of Jesus Christ who will take a stand and be all in no matter what the cost or the consequences? It's a great question, right? Is that the kind of believer you're going to be at all costs, that you will take a stand no matter what it costs you, no matter what is on the line in the world in which we live? Are you going to be that kind of follower, or will you be a nominal Christian? And that's really what Jesus is getting at. Now, when I say nominal Christian, okay, people are like, okay, what's a nominal Christian? So I made a list. A nominal Christian believes in a personal God. A nominal Christian accepts Jesus as the Son of God. A nominal Christian owns a Bible. A nominal Christian wants their child to receive religion and education in the schools. A nominal Christian believes in life after death. A nominal Christian believes in prayer, especially when you bought a lottery ticket. Right? Or the occasional meal, or when your world turns completely upside down and you don't know who else to turn to. You see, one of the main characteristics of a nominal Christian is it has a form of godliness to it. It does. And if we're not careful, and this is why Jesus is teaching this message, if we're not careful, we'll take that form of godliness and we'll go, okay, I'm good, it's okay. Look, Jesus is happy with me, and Jesus' words are saying something very different. So today I want to wrestle with this at a gut level. Now, it describes what Jesus is talking about, very much what we're dealing with at a very real level, okay? We have to move from being a nominal Christian to a believer who is all in for Jesus Christ. And what does that look like? Well, interestingly enough, Jesus touches on this. He talks about it. And in this message, I think there are three choices that Jesus kind of unpacks, some wise choices that you need to make. And the first one is this. You got to choose the right path, okay? Sounds easy. Right? You have to choose the right path. In verses 13 and following of Matthew chapter 7, if you're following along, if not, it'll be on the screen. Jesus says, you can enter God's kingdom only through the narrow gate. So how do you enter into God's kingdom? Through the what? Through the narrow gate. Super important. The highway to hell is broad and the gate is wide for many who choose that. But the gateway to life is very narrow, and the road is difficult, and only a few ever find it. Aren't you glad you came to church this morning? Right? It's like, man, that is not, those aren't the words that we want to hear. Now, Jesus is going to expound on this a little bit. He identifies the two different paths. There's two different ways to life, and I would argue there's the easy path and there's the difficult path. That's really kind of how that works. And a good definition of the easy path is also a word that we like to throw around for a younger generation. I'm not going to pick on anybody, but we like to call them entitled. Right? We look at the young and we're like, oh, they're entitled. Can I just make an argument for this morning that we're not going to think about everybody else? We're just going to look at ourselves. And the truth is, every one of us are entitled. Every one of us have a little bit of entitlement syndrome. And what is entitlement? Well, a good definition of entitlement would be that I'm exempt from responsibility and you should give me special treatment. Now, I know automatically you think, nope, that's not me. That's the next generation behind me or two generations behind me. But the reality is all of us feel that way. It's an attitude that we see and hear, okay? Everybody gets a trophy. But let's apply it to faith. We think if we can just get by and just do enough, that we're going to get a trophy at the end of it all. And Jesus is going, hey, there's something you need to be aware of. See, people who feel entitled have the following characteristics: an attitude of being special. Christians have never done that in their culture, have they? That we feel different than somebody who's not yet a believer. They have a lifestyle with no boundaries and no restrictions. I'm going to do what I want, when I want, and how I want, because it's mine. It's my money. I'm going to spend it how I want it. They have a refusal to accept responsibility. They believe that freedom is actually the goal in life. And they say, you know what? It's my life. It's not long, so I'm going to live it now. And I live life to the absolute what? So you know. And we're all guilty of it at some level. Solomon, the wisest man to ever live, wrote this in Proverbs chapter 14, verse 12. He says, what you think is the right road may actually lead to death. It's a little frightening and unnerving at some level, isn't it? In his book, The Entitlement Cure, Dr. John Townsend writes these words. I thought this was pretty profound. He says, entitlement has a negative impact on our society today. He wasn't picking on a generation, just society in general. Because of entitlement, companies must now deal with unmotivated employees. Parents are faced with raising self-centered children. Young adults are still living at home and refuse to grow up. Leaders expect special treatment because of their title, not because of their character. Marriages are torn apart by self-centered spouses, and ministries are controlled by prima donna leaders. Isn't that crazy? See, I believe our world today suffers greatly from entitlement. All of us at some level. We kind of look at the hard stuff of life, and we kind of think of it this way. Look, I'm going to deal with that later. I might actually not deal with it at all if I can avoid it. Or I'll just let somebody else handle it if they will. And if somebody else will handle it, then I don't have to, and it's not going to cost me a lot, and I know it'll get done, and I'll feel good about myself. Or maybe I'll just throw a little bit of money at it, because then that way I can say I was a part of it, but I really wasn't a part of it. And see, maybe you're asking, so what's the cure of entitlement? Well, Jesus answers that. He says the narrow road. That's really the cure. It's not the answer that we want. When I was doing this message, I was like, seriously, I'm thinking, how in the world can I write this in such a way that people now aren't going, man, I don't know that I want to be in this. But the reality is we have to teach what God says is true. And the fact is, it is difficult. The hard path is not always easy. As a matter of fact, the hard path is the habit of doing what is best rather than doing what is comfortable. And can we all just admit we like comfort? Right? There's certain things we like, and we like it a certain way, and we want things to be the way that we like it. Why? Because we're comfortable. In fact, it's difficult to take the hard path, and I want us to think about it. See, entitlement directs you to give the minimum. Entitlement directs us to give the shortcut. Entitlement says take the easiest path to get there. Entitlement says to think only of yourself first, and then if you've got time, think of other people later. However, the hard path is very different. It's difficult, it's uncomfortable, it takes longer, it requires more energy. Here's the tough one. It requires more sacrifice of us. Now you might be thinking, why in the world should we take the hard path as Christians? I mean, really, let's think about that. Let's have an honest conversation. If we're a Christian, then why should we choose the hard path? Well, it's pretty simple because Jesus modeled it. Jesus showed us what the path was. Let's just go back and think about his life for a minute. He suffered. He was beaten. He was abused. He was crucified on a Roman cross. And he died for no other reason than his love for mankind who turned their back on him. Think about that. See, Jesus took the hard path, and he was setting the example. If you take a look at 1 Peter, Peter writes about this in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. He says, so then, since Christ suffered physical pain, you must arm yourself with the same attitude that he had and be ready to suffer too. Now, that does not mean that you're going to, but he's saying we need to be prepared for the fact if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, there's going to be a cost involved at some level. He goes on, for if you have suffered physically for Christ, you have finished with sin, right? You're done. You won't spend the rest of your lives chasing your own desires, but you will be anxious to do the will of God. You have had enough in the past of evil things that godless people enjoy their immorality and their lust, their feasting and their drunkenness and their wild parties and their terrible worship of idols. Of course, your former friends are surprised. I'm going to pause there. Any of you have friends that are surprised that you're a follower of Jesus? Anybody gutsy enough to raise their hand on that one? I surprise a lot of my high school buddies. When I first went into ministry, they're like, what? Right? We surprise people. He says, of course, your former friends are surprised when you no longer plunge into the flood of wild and destructive things that they do. So they slander you. But remember, they will too have to face God, who stands ready to judge everyone, both the living and the dead. So I'm not telling you not to do life with people who are not yet believers. I think you should, and I do a lot of life with people who are not yet believers. But the reality is people are going to look at you different. They're going to think different. They're going to joke. They're going to say things. There's going to be a little bit of suffering. See, God's way, though, will never fail us. It will make you uncomfortable. That's just the reality, but it's a better way. If you read the end of the Bible, if you go to the book of Revelation, here's a couple of things I know to be true. I can promise you this. The church survives. Followers of Jesus are successful. And eternity is promised. That we know. And we should have our confidence in that. However, it requires us to take the hard path. So Jesus says, look, there's not a guarantee. If you live for today, and if you ignore the reality of tomorrow, there's probably going to be a consequence. So the question that we need to ask is, what do we want? And what are we willing to do to get what we want? And you ultimately have to define that. What is your life about, and what do you want the end result to be? How do you want your life to end? See, the result, you can either have live only once mentality, and let's be honest, that's the easy life. That's because it requires nothing. You just kind of go along with the crowd. You follow culture. You do exactly what culture does. The easy path is filled with all kinds of good intentions, right? We say it, I'm going to get to that one day. One day I'm going to, when I retire, I love this. This is one of my favorites that people throw at their pastor. One day when I retire, I'm going to be generous. No, you're not. You know why? Because you're not generous now. Maybe you don't have as much. Oh man, if I won the lottery, I would give it all away. No, you won't. You won't. And that's not wrong. Just hear me. It's just who you are, and it's the choices that you make in the little things. Because Jesus says the hard path is difficult. See, here's the reality of what I was just talking about. Success is revealed in discipline. It's the little things that you do each and every day. Maybe a better way to say that is you pay the price for success today to enjoy the pleasures of success tomorrow. Right? There's a cost on the front end. Think about that for a second. We pay the price of success today to enjoy the pleasures of tomorrow. However, there's a lot of people in life that say, you know what, I just don't want that. They turn it around and they say, no, I'm going to work hard right now, and I'm going to live it up right now because I'm not guaranteed tomorrow. But here's the thing. You are guaranteed tomorrow. You're just not guaranteed tomorrow here on earth. So the choices that you're making is guaranteeing your eternal future, which is a lot longer than the 60 to 80 to 90 to 100 plus years that you might live. See, either way, we're going to have to pay a price. The question is, do you want to win the battle or do you want to win the war? Do you want to win the battle or do you want to win the war? Because if you want to win the battle, go enjoy life. You're gonna enjoy life in the moment. But if you want to win the war, and I think most of us do, then we have to make daily decisions to follow Jesus, daily decisions to do what is right. Because ultimately, there's a bigger payoff in the end. Sometimes there's a bigger payoff in the midst of it all. Have you ever gone through things or seen somebody go through things that are a believer and one who's not a believer, and how they go through the difficulties in life? They're very different, right? Because the believer who's really locked in a relationship with Jesus knows they're not living for today. They're living for something greater. So make daily decisions to follow Jesus, because we know that the reward is better. But truthfully, the crowd, most of the time, doesn't want to do the hard decisions, because the hard decisions oftentimes find you lonely and not connected to the crowd as much. George Bernard Shaw said it this way. He says, the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. Now, I intentionally stopped that quote there, because if you just read it there and you just put that on social media, it's like, yeah, the culture believes that. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. If he's reasonable, he's smart, he does this. But Shaw goes on. He actually says, but the unreasonable man persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. Think about it. In other words, you You want to be reasonable, go along with everybody in culture and what everybody's doing and just sort of go along with the crowd. But the truth is, the unreasonable man chooses the hard path because he realizes the payoff is greater in the end. I want to ask you, which path will you choose? Are you an easy path or are you a difficult path? It's just a great question to ask, right? Which path are you teaching your children to take? Which path requires the most discipline? Is it when you're talking to your kids, do you teach them about discipline or do you teach them about entitlement? In the book of Deuteronomy, Moses is 120 years old. Can you imagine living 120 years, right? Now imagine doing it in the desert with a group of people that were supposed to make it into the promised land, but they disobeyed God, so God just waited them out, right? Until the next generation was raised up. Moses lived long enough to see that. And now Moses is 120 years old. He's reaching the end of his life. He realizes that he's not going to make the promised land. He realizes because of a punishment that God gave him. And he's getting ready to turn over the reins to Joshua. And he's going to get to see the people enter the promised land, and then he's going to go be with God for the rest of eternity. And he's going to talk to the Israelite people one last time. And in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19, after a long dissertation, you thought my sermons were long, right? Moses is giving them his last words, and I love this. He comes to verse 19, and he says, "Today I have given you the choice between life and death, between blessings and curses. Now I call on heaven and earth to witness the choice that you make." I want you to understand, Moses made some foolish decisions early in his life, and he's looking back on his life when he's speaking these words, and he's trying to talk to the next generation going, hey, let's make better choices. Let's do something different. And then he says these powerful words, "Oh, that you would choose life so that you and your descendants might live." Oh, that you would choose life. Do you want to experience life today for you and your children? God says, or Moses says, listen to God and hold on to what is true. Stay steadfast and realize that it's not necessarily what the culture wants, but it's what ultimately will get you the best return on investment long term. And he's saying, make the wise choice. Oh, that you would choose the right path. Which leads to the second choice that I want to talk about this morning, and that is to choose the right teacher. So if you've chosen the right path, now you have to choose the right teacher. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 through 17, and then I'm going to jump to verse 20. He says, beware of false prophets, come disguised as harmless sheep, but are really vicious wolves. You can identify them by their fruit, that is, by the way that they act. Can you pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? A good tree produces good fruit, and bad trees produce bad fruit. Verse 20, yes, just as you can identify a tree by its fruit, so you can identify people by their what? By their actions. Look at their actions. Look at how they live. So you have to choose the right teachers. And he kind of talks through some different things. For instance, preachers and teachers can be used as false prophets. Very simply distorting the truth just a little bit. We don't have to distort the truth a lot, just a little bit, just to, as we talk about the path, staying on the path to Jesus, all you got to do is just get it off an inch or two, right? And on the front end, it doesn't seem like it's a lot, but if you keep going that direction, long term, it's going to get you way away from the target. Counselors, another one, can give the wrong message by simply saying things that I think have good intentions. For instance, God just wants you to be happy. If you read God's word, you'll find very quickly, God is not in the business of just making us happy. There's no scriptures that promise that God just wants us to be happy and that's it, that there's not a cost to following him. Just to give you a heads up, right? It's important to know that. Let's take advertisers. We live in a world of advertisement. You see thousands of advertisers today. Have you ever seen these commercials? I don't watch a ton of TV, but these always crack me up. It'll be some drug, it'll be some new thing that's come on the market, and how it's gonna change your life forever. It's either gonna change your physical relationship with your spouse, or it's gonna change the way you look or the way you feel. And they've got usually some man or woman running through a field with flowers and the sun shining and this wonderful music. And you're like, oh, this is the next best thing. And then the next 3 minutes, the guy speeds up real fast and tells you all of the negative side effects. And you're like, yeah, I want that. Or the doctor gives you a pill and then gives you all the side. And I get it. We live in a world, you need to know those things, okay? But the truth is, oftentimes we're lied to or we're deceived. We're told, hey, this is the next best thing, do this. But the reality is we don't think about the full consequences of what it is. And Jesus says you have to be on your guard. The word is beware. Be smart. We've got to be alert because of false teachers. They're smooth. They take advantage of you if you're not careful. Reminds me of a story of a salesman traveling through the hill country of West Virginia. He's on his way through the state. He's thirsty, so he pulls off the side of the road. He wants to buy a pop. He walks in, and immediately he looks over into to the left corner of this little gas station, and there's a kitten drinking out of an antique bowl. Now, this salesman is an antique collector, and he realizes very quickly that that bowl is worth a lot of money, and he wants to see if he can buy it from the old man behind the counter. But the old man, he knows if he walks up and says, hey, can I buy the dish that your cat's drinking out of, he's going to immediately know that it's a high-priced, high-valued item. So instead, he thinks, I'll just buy the kitten, okay? So he walks up to the old man and he says, hey, I think this kitten is adorable. Is there any way I could buy it? And the old man goes, it's really one of my favorite cats. I don't know if I can let that go. And he says, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $10. And the old man laughs. He says, no. He says, that cat's worth way more than $10 to me. And the young salesman goes, well, how about $50? And the old man behind the counter, no. And he kind of goes back and forth, finally gets the price up to $350. And the old man goes, fair enough. He says, I'll sell you the cat. So the guy whips out his wallet. He gives him three $100 bills, a $50 bill. He picks up the cat, and he gets ready to walk out. And he goes, hey, he says, by the way, he says, I noticed the cat was drinking out of the dish over here. Can I have that too so he can have a dish to drink out of? And the old man said, no. He goes, that's my lucky dish. And the young salesman goes, what do you mean lucky dish? The old man behind the counter said, son, I've sold 32 cats just this week alone. See, deception's everywhere, right? Who's deceiving who? Who's pulling the wool over whose eyes? It's a dumb joke, but it drives the point home, doesn't it? See, how do you know if a person is truthful or deceptive? How do you know? How do you know which person to follow, trust, or believe? It takes discernment, and here's the reality. There it is. Truth is revealed by discernment, right? The Apostle Paul says it this way in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 21 and 22. Test everything that is said, hold to what is good, and stay away from all kinds of evil. Test everything that is said. If I could just give you a little bit of advice, my advice would be to see it, discern it, and test it. See it, discern it, and test it. That's why followers of Christ today, we have to believe that discernment is important and understand. It was a little easier to discern when I was growing up. You ever have that feeling? Some of you are a little bit older than me. Think back. Some of you are younger than me. I just had Donnie Sanchez, our new campus pastor at Austintown. We were doing a recording for an upcoming series, and I made a statement. He started laughing. He's like, bro, you are now the old man in the room. I wanted to punch him. I was like, you little twerp, right? And we're having this conversation, and the truth is, I kind of am. And I think back to my childhood, and maybe you should think about yours. Maybe you grew up, we didn't grow up with internet, right? We had a television in our living room, but it never came on until after 6 p.m. 6 o'clock, the 6 o'clock news came on, and then some shows came on after that. Before that, we were out running and playing until dark or close to dark. A lot of times, we didn't even make it in to see the television. It was just different, right? We didn't have a lot of outside influences. There were your teachers, your parents, your coaches. I thought about the people in my church. Almost everybody in my church spanked my butt at one time or another. You know, you just don't get that now. I'm still apologizing to people for things I did as a kid. But now it's a completely different world with the internet and social media, streaming services and phones, news outlets, you name it. We are inundated with millions of bits of information. And hear me, I'm not anti-technology. I think it's incredible. But think about the negative effects of it. Everybody has an opinion, and now you hear everybody's opinion instantaneously. There's not something that, somebody passes gas at a restaurant that's famous. You're going to find out before the person sitting across the table realizes it, right? It's just the culture in which we live. And we're learning thousands. Some of you haven't caught that yet. It's good. We're learning life from all of these bits of information. And in order to make sense of it all, you need discernment. And the Bible describes false teachers as those that add to the gospel. They do. They, in essence, draw attention oftentimes to themselves and not to God's word. They tell you what you want to hear instead of what you need to hear. They're more concerned about charisma than they are character. And oftentimes they have no fruit. On the other hand, the Bible describes a good teacher as those who preach the Bible and the Bible only, that they're willing to deal with the hard subjects, that they're willing to tell the truth, that they're willing to tell you what you need to know and not necessarily what you want to hear, because the truth is, if we're going to win this, we got to wrestle with the hard stuff too, right? They help others become better followers of Jesus. So I thought about this as I was writing. How would you know if GCC was the real thing? How would you know if what I'm teaching you is good? How do you discern that? And I think I would answer it this way. Is there fruit from the ministry? Is there fruit from the ministry that is happening in this place? After being a part of GCC, do you see your marriage being better? Are you putting the needs of others ahead of yourself? Are you becoming more generous with your time, talent, treasures, and testimony? Are you displaying the values of Jesus in your place at work? Are you teaching your kids to put God first? Are you sharing Jesus with your neighbor? Are you growing in your faith? Are people's lives being changed because of what we're doing? If not, there's this little form for the Boardman campus. Come on, that was funny. Ow. You used to be my favorite service. See, the reality is if you're growing in your faith and there's fruit, then you're connected to a good teacher. And I'm not using this to brag about me. I'm just talking about using discernment because life throws a lot of teachers our way. And there's a lot of false in the world in which we live. And I see it a lot on social media. Good, I think, even intending to be God-honoring people who distort God's word. And you'll see things and I'm like, man, that is not biblical. That is not true. And people are sharing it on their Facebook as though, man, isn't this right? And it feeds that stuff that I'm talking about, which is the wide path that Jesus talks about. Which leads to the third thing, and that is the right foundation. You've got to choose the right foundation. Jesus continues in Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27. Anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds their house on solid rock. Though the rains come in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against that house, it will not collapse because it is built on bedrock. But there it is. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like the person who builds a house on the sand. When the rains and the floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. You see, every day, each of us build our lives on a foundation. You can't avoid it. You do. You make a choice every day to build your life on one foundation or another. It's solid or it's sandy. So let me ask. You going to lie or are you going to tell the truth? You're making a choice. You're going to stretch the truth a little bit or are you going to tell the whole truth? You're making a choice. You're going to hold on to resentment or are you going to extend forgiveness? You're building on a foundation. You're going to tear others down or are you going to build them up? Let me tell you, we live in a culture, it's just easy to tear people down, isn't it? You're going to keep Jesus to ourselves or are we going to share Jesus with others? Are we going to hang tough when troubles come or are we going to throw in the towel? See, what foundation are you trying to build? Because the reality is this, and I believe this, the older I get, the more I believe this is true, is faith is revealed by storms. It's not revealed in the good times. It's easy to be a follower of Jesus in the good times. It's easier to just sail through life when everything's firing on all cylinders. And hear me, it's great when it does. And God is still good and God is still involved in your life. But hear me, there are times when the rug is jerked out from underneath you. And the truth is, your faith is revealed by the storms that you go through. And as we read this last part of the sermon, I think we wish that Jesus would just say, you know what, there's two different foundations, but the storms aren't going to come. I think that's what we wish he would say. Because then we could build our house on either foundation and there wouldn't be a lot to get through it and we'd risk it and just hope it all works out in the end. But the truth is, We know that's not reality. We live in a world that's fallen and sinful. We live in a world, sadly, that is full of abuse, racism, cancer, divorce, suffering, terrorist accidents, moral collapse. We see it over and over and over again. And that's why we need to build our lives on a strong foundation. Because that foundation is revealed when the struggles and storms come. So let me ask, what part of your life is stable, built on a solid foundation, and what part is built on a sandy foundation? Because I think the truth is, most all of us in the room, including myself, there are some areas that we're probably more sand than we are rock. And this is one of those come to Jesus moments, right? Where we just have to answer the hard question. Because here's what I believe. I believe the enemy does not attack where things are solid. I think he comes after the parts that he knows are on sandy ground, that he knows are questionable, that he can get in and he can start making a little bit of a mess of it. For instance, if you're stable financially, but your marriage is on the rocks, guess where Satan's going to attack? He's not going to attack you in your finances. He doesn't need to. He's going to make a muck in your marriage. And he's going to try just to drive just enough of a wedge to make it a little bit wider and a little bit wider. Before long, if he knows he can destroy that, he'll destroy everything that comes with it. Or maybe you're faithful in service and faithful in attendance. You show up at church, but you don't really manage your emotions well. You don't keep yourself under control. You kind of let people have it on social media and anywhere else that you're at. Guess where Satan's going to attack? He doesn't care if you get up and show up on Sunday morning because he knows if he can get you somewhere else, then he's won the battle. See, that's where the storms hit first, in those sandy areas. And each of us must be willing to take ownership. So let me ask you, just honest gut level, do you find yourself really living for today? Just this week, this month, this year? Because that's kind of how we do life, right? We make plans. We're already planning. 2024 is going to be here. It's hard to believe that 2023 just finished, right? That we're coming into the close. We're getting ready to go into 24. And you're thinking about it. And maybe, just maybe, you're thinking about a few years later. My wife and I just sit down and we're starting to talk much more serious about retirement and making sure that we're planning right because we're still not old, even though Donnie thinks I am, right? And we're thinking through those things. But let me ask you this. And all of those things are good. Think about next week. Think about next month. Think about next year. But do you think about eternity? Because hear me. Regardless of what you think about today, where you live forever matters. And I don't find it ironic that Jesus ended the sermon on that. I think he just asked a very easy, simple question that has a very difficult answer to come with it. Are you going to build your life on a solid foundation that you know when the storms of life come, it can withstand it? Or are you going to build your life on a sandy foundation? See, I think truthfully, there's some areas in all of our lives that we could build a little bit stronger. And I want you to know, regardless of your past decisions, regardless of where you sit today, because I'm a grace guy, and I firmly believe in God's grace, that there's still good news, that God never gives up on us. When I give up on me, when you give up on you, God's still in your corner. Why? He created you in his image, and he loves you desperately. He just wants you to reorient yourself back to him. So maybe you've spent your entire life building on a sandy foundation. Hear me, it's never too late. It just isn't. That's the beauty of God. That's the beauty of grace. Every time you say, and you get to make a decision, this time I'm going to do it God's way in this area of my life, you're starting to build on a solid foundation. And it starts with today. It starts with a decision today. I'm going to do this today. And every time you say, this time I will not spend what I do not have, you're building on a solid foundation. And every time you say, this time I'm going to take control of my thoughts, you're building on a solid foundation. And every time you say, I'm not going to blow up and I'm not going to get angry at that guy at work, even though he gets on my absolute every nerve, you're building on a solid foundation. Every time you look at your spouse and you say, I'm going to show my husband or my wife the respect they deserve, you're building on a solid foundation. And hear me, we miss the mark every day, but we have to make a conscientious choice, and it comes down to how much are you willing to hear the words of Jesus and actually put them into practice. So here's the deal. You have homework. My kids have been inundated with homework lately. The end of the semester is coming, and they're frantic getting all this stuff done. And I thought it'll be fun right before Christmas to give the whole congregation some homework. You didn't find that funny at all, did you? Here it is. It's really simple. Because I know in your heart you know the answer. There's an area of your life, just one. Just pick one. If you've got more than one, just pick one. That you know is on sandy soil. You know it's not stable. You know you're not living the life that you should be. You know you're not making the decisions that honor God, and whatever that is. And today you're going to make a decision that you're going to start building it on solid foundation. And it's not going to instantaneously fix, but it's a conscientious choice you make. Some of you are here this morning and you have no idea what a relationship with Jesus is, and that's the step you need to take. There's a whole group of people sitting back there right now with red sweatshirts on that want nothing more than to help you take the next step in your faith journey. Because we've got to begin to listen to what Jesus says, hear the words, and put them into practice. Right? So what is it? What's that area that you know you need to move from sandy to rock solid? Father God in heaven, we come to you right now, blessed beyond belief by all that you have given us. Truth be told, God, we don't deserve your goodness, but you give it anyway. And this morning, my heart's prayer and my heart's desire is that every one of us, including myself, would just pick one area that we really need to start building more and more on a solid foundation, because we've allowed Satan to give us the opportunity to put it on more sand than we even want to admit. And God, my prayer this morning is there's someone in this room that doesn't yet know you in the way that you want them to know you, that they have not stepped across the line of faith, that they would be willing to take that bold step. Because it just doesn't change today, and it doesn't just change tomorrow, but it changes all of eternity for us and for many more behind us. God, we love you. We're not good enough. We fail you every day, but your grace sustains us. And even though we're not deserving of it, we love that you give it freely. So God, forgive us when we mess up. And help us to be people of bold steps, especially today. We love you and thank you for all that you do. In Christ Jesus' name I pray, and we all said together, amen.